Before we begin, in the spirit of reconciliation and respect, the InkGuild acknowledges that we live, work, and play on the traditional Treaty 7 territory of the Blackfoot Confederacy, Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, as well as the Stoney Nakoda and the Tsuut'ina nations. This territory is also home to the Métis nations of Alberta, Region 3 within the historical Northwest Métis homeland. Finally, we acknowledge all Indigenous and non-Indigenous to honor and celebrate this territory alongside us.
Oh my god, there's Let's Plays of Crazy Frog Racer. Okay, I know what I'm doing with my night. Sorry guys, something just came up. Actually, I can't record tonight. Completely unrelated, I swear.
Oh, so
Are you ditching us?
Are you actually?
No, I'm joking. Oh my
okay.
god.
I was like, dude. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Hey there.
Bonjour.
Hello, everybody.
Welcome back to the InkGuild podcast. Just go to fucking therapy.
Don't correct me. I don't care.
Need to start a revolution.
I'm going to fucking explode if I don't say this by now.
I brought you to this podcast. I can take you out.
I'm going to summon up his spirit to fix all of this up for me.
You didn't have good enough tea and or comic books, so.
And you know what? I'm gonna say it.
All of them are fucking idiots.
Everyone is taking cocaine.
Say your morning routine.
Big robot. Oh, I can die and make Victor break out his Hoover vacuum for you to call her the girl that turned dad.
Finally, his swordfish was free.
Oh, I forgot what I was.
You get distracted by Gabe.
Hello and welcome to this episode of the InkGuild podcast. Podcast. What's wrong with the English language?
A lot. Intro, amazing.
I just can't speak. Today we're talking about writing advice, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I'll be the host tonight, Marie-Soleil, and we've also got Alex joining us.
Hello.
And Dean.
Hello.
All right. So we're going to start off today's discussion talking about good writing advice that we've gotten and how it's helped us. And then we'll move on to the bad writing advice. Okay.
Sounds good.
Mm-hmm. Sounds good to me.
Cool. I think I had an order that we were going to do this, but I think I'll just start us off with a piece of writing advice that kind of helped me out. And then we'll go through, like, I'll go and then Alex can go and Dean can go. How does that sound?
Mm-hmm.
Perfect.
And of course we can discuss the different top pieces of advice. Anyway, so one of the pieces of writing advice that I was given in, like, I want to say 8th grade English class was to vary your sentence starters. And that helped me put more variety in my writing and my, like, sentences and everything in general. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree with this one.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's so, like, frustrating to read something where every sentence starts exactly the same. I think this advice can actually be applied just in general. Vary your sentences, vary how you start your sentences, how you end your sentences, how long your sentences are, how many, like, commas are in your sentences. Variety.
Mm-hmm.
It's important.
Yes.
Yeah.
Variety is good.
To add on to that too, yeah, I think it was this one post that I saw years ago now, I think, where on varying sentences, it was consider a paragraph like a symphony. If it was all the same length of sentences, it would be pretty boring to read, but when you have, like, a mingling between, like, short sentences, long sentences, like one word sentences, even if it like, or like, you know, punctuated words in between, like is just this really nice like mix of like exposition, of action, of dialogue, of suspense, of tension. It just works so well when everything is just kind of like when everything is just kind of I wouldn't say like completely chaotically, obviously, but just when it's not just all the same. Because if it's like, if you get a paragraph that's all the same length, like if it's like what 10 words per sentence, that's kind of boring unless it's stylistic, which I will get onto actually later. But yeah, I think varying sentences is good.
Even if it's just like, if you start every sentence with a noun, even if it's a different noun, that still gets very repetitive.
Oh,
like
yeah.
you're starting them with names and stuff, that still gets very repetitive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like the amount of times that I've read stories that are just like, I did this, I did this, I did this, and then I did this. They're just like, great. Anything else you want to share?
Yeah. For me, I'm guilty of this pretty much still, where I will start off a sentence with something like character A did this, and then it goes off from their action. So it's, I can't really. What's the thing? My brain is kind of farting. What's a word that ends with like an ing? What's the name for a word that ends with an ing?
Gerund.
A gerund? Yeah. Yeah,
Gerunds.
I am so guilty of starting off some of my sentences sometimes with gerunds that it's just completely repetitive at that point. Like it goes from like, you know, Porter did this, and then gerund about like that specific action, and then like Magna did this, gerund, like you know, pronoun. It's kind of hard. It doesn't really make much sense, like as I explained it, but basically just my own paragraphs tend to be very repetitive. So like trying to vary it is hard, but it's absolutely, it just makes the story a lot better, because then like there's, you know, variety.
Yeah, it's definitely something that's tricky to keep in mind when you're like in the moment, but you know what? That's what editing is for.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I am saying this trying to convince myself of that as well, for the record.
If we're okay to like move on to another point, I have one immediately based off of that. Write first, edit second. Horrible peeve of mine. Or horrible peeve. I wouldn't say peeve. Like I'm guilty of that, especially because, well, you two know this. Like I'll write something and then spend hours, sometimes even days, just back on that same section, like editing it, make sure everything is flowing correctly as is, rather than just finishing the entire story. And for some reason, like that is just so like counterproductive, because knowing that it's a draft, you're going to be making mistakes already. Like you're going to miss some punctuation, you're going to like miss you're going to miss like sentence structure, like you're going to like not have like the sentence structure that you want yet. But like you shouldn't be considering that when you're writing a draft, especially if it's long form too. Like that shit just takes way too long to edit and write already. So trying to like intermingle those two takes forever. It's the reason why Xeno, like for me, has been in development for so long. It's because I always think like, oh shit, wait, hold on, this plot point that I didn't think about months ago now makes sense. So I'm going to now integrate it into the plot, when I don't just sit down in the moment and then just plan everything out and then just let the draft itself just kind of come naturally. And maybe that's just my own kind of like,
It's not.
Yeah. I don't know what it is about like thing. I don't know what it is about like being a writer then and constantly going back to your draft and thinking, oh my God, it's a draft. I know it's a draft, but I want it to be a perfect draft.
I know what it is. I'm a perfectionist.
Yeah.
It's this sense that like I have to get it right on like the first try.
Same.
I think
if it's not right, what's the point?
Yeah, but the thing is, you don't. It's really hard advice to follow, but it's important advice.
Mm-hmm.
Drafts are drafts. treat them like it. This is not the final product. You will edit it so many times after this before it sees the light of publication.
Yeah. Like whether it's your own editing personally and like, you know, like quick vets from your friends or seeking out editors, like it's going to be edited anyway. Like it's going to be read, it's going to be vetted, it's going to be thoroughly checked from, you know, from a more technical standpoint. But in the moment when you're writing the story, like obviously you shouldn't be forgetting everything when it comes to structure, but just not focusing on it too much helps with progression. Like you it just naturally helps with like making sure that the story is flowing and that you're kind of getting your words down onto page more often than you are like thinking about how you can get it perfectly, which, you know, going back to what we were talking about, it's my guiltiest thing as a writer, because wow, like for a story that for myself, for a story that should have been done by now, it's just been constant edit after constant edit on a draft that should not be completely totally edited right now.
Yeah. I think a good thing to help with this is to remember you can't edit something that doesn't exist. So make the thing exist. Yeah. Make sure that you can make the thing exist, and then you can make it better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think as another thing too, that I've heard, to kind of go off of that, what was it? I think like if you're going to have it edited, if you're going to have your story edited, have someone else do it. It is so hard. Absolutely. It is so hard to like ignore. It's so hard to put your own biases and your own like creative like integrity aside when you are constantly editing your piece, because you think, okay, this makes sense, all of this works, but then suddenly you're thinking, wait, hold on, like someone else would be thinking, wait, this doesn't really add anything, or this is kind of a bit, or this is getting a bit repetitive, or this is a little bit boring, and that's not a bad thing, right? Like, I don't know, what do you guys think on that?
You should absolutely have someone else edit your work. You can edit your own work. And if you do, the one thing I recommend is read it out loud, because you will catch so many little grammatical things that you didn't notice, and you won't notice if you read it silently. So read everything out loud, but then hand it off to someone else, because when you're in your own head, it's really easy to get caught up in everything you know about your story, that sometimes you might forget to put those things on the page.
Yeah, you could have a fact in your head that you know, like, oh yeah, this totally makes sense because she has this powerful magical item. You've never mentioned that powerful magical item in the writing, so it doesn't actually make sense to anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Or when you think like of a thing, of like a magical item or like a weapon or something, you think it might be the coolest thing ever. You might think it's the coolest thing ever, but when you realize that you haven't explained it through your story and you only kind of keep it for yourself, it's like, well, shit, I didn't think about that before. Like, I know how cool of a thing it is. I know the work that I put into it, but no one else does, right?
Yeah. And also I find if you get other people to read stuff, they can help you figure out, like, if there's anything that you're trying to like make subtle, having other people read it is a good way to find out if you're being too subtle or not subtle enough.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, especially because you never really know just how subtle you're being, especially if you're trying to give like exposition, because if you're trying to imply something, it's important to know that you already know what's going to happen. You as a writer know that this twist is happening, or you as a writer know that this character is going to appear. Likely no one else does. Even if you have a signature style, it's still a new story that they have never been experienced, or like they've never been exposed to, right? So like, you know, yeah, just when you're saying, I think when you're editing, or when you're really in the editing phase, it's good to have other people's perspectives.
Yeah. If nobody has anything else to talk about that, Alex, do you have any good advice?
Best advice that I have ever gotten. Write for yourself. Write stuff that you want to write. Like first and foremost, you know, if you don't enjoy what you're writing, it's going to show in your work. I think you need to like focus on things that make you happy rather than worrying whether everyone else will like it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Like, if it's just not fun for you, then it's just not fun. Like, what are you even doing it for? Right? Like, you know, not everything. Oh, go ahead, Alex.
I was just gonna say, I feel like it's something that's very tricky to do in our like current cultural climate, because a lot of the art that is being pushed out is so like corporate and like money grabby.
Everything's made for a profit.
Yeah, everything's made for a profit. But art shouldn't be about profit. Art should be for art. And I think that truly like passionate art is something that the world is lacking a lot of right now, and I think that's something that we as writers should be trying to help bring more into the world.
Yeah. Like I've seen people talking about this recently, that like a lot of like the Harley Quinn romance novels and like those the publishing companies that have like a bunch of books and they're always coming out with more books, they all follow a similar pattern to it. And it's because they have a criteria that those books need to follow or they won't be published. And it just gets boring after a while.
Because then like it may be interesting characters, but ultimately like everything is just starting to feel the same.
Yeah.
Right. And to kind of sorry, Alex, go.
No, I was just gonna say, I feel like this is kind of why like things like fan fiction and fan art are so popular right now, because that is just like passionate, like passion fueled art. Like it's being so like passionate about something that you can't help but create it. And I feel like we need more like original art kind of like along that line, where it's so important to you that you need to get it out there. And the truth is, even if it doesn't seem like it, there's something out there for everyone. No matter what you're writing, no matter how like weird you think it is, there is someone out there who will enjoy it.
Yeah. There's a point to it where it's like self-indulgent, but not in a bad way.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with like self-indulging either, to an extent, and I'll kind of elaborate more on that later. Just if you think like this one mythical sword that you created for your story is cool, then yeah, that's cool. Like if you think these characters have a good relationship, yeah, that's great. Like it obviously there are certain extents to that, but just there's nothing wrong with thinking that your idea initially is cool. It just kind of then depends on how you develop it, and like where that cool thing goes is where it is either up for like, you know, additional praise or, you know, some criticism. Because, you know, when it comes to writing for yourself, like Alex said, it's very much a necessity, because if it gets into your head that like, oh, there's no original stories anymore, or like this character feels very similar to this character, or like, you know, this weapon has been done before, or like these magic systems are very similar to this other, like there's just so much to think about that bums you out as a writer, because you're thinking like, man, I want to be an original writer. And like that's maybe another piece of writing advice that I've heard about. Like don't prioritize like a new original idea, because truthfully there aren't that many new stories anymore. Like I'm sure you guys have all heard of the thing where like, you know, there's only like 6 ways or 7 ways, or like, you know, like let's say 6 ways to tell a story. That's fine. Like,
but
even
no one's ever told a story like the same way that you do.
Exactly. Like we did we did a Stranger Things episode not that long ago. That in itself is a really, really special story. Like Avatar and Korra are two very, like, they're two stories that are set in the same world, but they are vastly different. And even amongst like us three right now, like Xeno is different from Crown, and Crown is different from Thing, and Crown is different from the short stories that Marie-Soleil does. Like, there's so much variety that you as a writer offer, and it shouldn't be about like being a wholly original writer. It should just be about like being an original writer thing. It should just be about like being like a writer. I think you don't like being original thing. Like being original shouldn't be your priority because you're already being original, right? It's your ideas, it's your world, it's your concepts. Yes, it may play into a lot of similar tropes, or it may play into like similar tropes, similar landscapes, but again, it's just based on what you do with it.
Yeah. Have fun. That's my other good one. Have fun. Enjoy yourself. Writing is art. It should make you happy.
Yeah. Well, if we're done on that, I guess it's my turn to put out another piece of good writing advice. I've got one thing. Keep samples of your work from like back when you first started writing. I've got notebooks from like when I was in grade 6 and I first started writing stuff, and I just like to go back to it to see how far I've progressed. Because sometimes there are days where like you sit and it's like, I'm shit. I can't write. What am I thinking? Why am I doing this? I can't. I'm never going to be able to finish this or something.
Mm-hmm.
So then I sit down and I go back and I look at this self-indulgent story about a princess who runs away from a kingdom and fights a dragon that I wrote when I was like 10 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And just where I came from, how far I've come from that.
Mm-hmm. I'm imagining we've all kept our drafts from like the creative writing classes that we've did, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Do you guys also check back on those from time to time? Because I do, and like it really, really just, like you said, Marie-Soleil, just like how far you've come as a writer, to see like all of the comments that people have made at the time still apply to how your writing is currently.
That's stuff that I always intend to do and then don't.
Like, I have I have samples from from previous creative writing classes, both from my first one and then also from the most recent ones that I've had. Some comments too. Like I'll even listen back to the workshop episode that we all did not that long ago, and like hearing everyone's opinions on it, and even if you exclude the fact that like it was given at the time, like all of it still kind of applies, because based on everything that we've been talking about, it's someone else's perspective. This is how this person is experiencing your work, right? And for all of the good comments, for the bad comments, like it all just kind of helps you grow naturally. And with samples, I definitely agree. Yeah, keep as many samples of your like creative writing as possible.
Yeah. I'll also say, kind of like expanding on this, I think another good piece of advice is know your strengths and weaknesses as a writer.
Mm-hmm.
Know what you're good at, be confident in it. Like, it's like so many artists suffer from like crippling self-doubt and like self-consciousness. It's like, no, you're a writer for a reason. You are good at it. Maybe you don't have everything down perfectly, but you have things that you're good at. Know what they are, be proud of those. And then also, on the other hand, know what your weaknesses are. Don't treat them as like the end of the world kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, but it's one of those things where it's like maybe you struggle with like formatting, so you know that you have to think extra hard when you're like doing certain things, or maybe you struggle with staying in the right tense. That's a really common issue. People will switch between the present tense and the past tense in their writing. And if you know that's something you struggle with, then that's something you can like focus on when you're doing your edits and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So just like keep track of the things that you know you're good at and the things you know you're bad at. And again, when you're getting like critiques and advice from people who like read your stories, look for patterns in the things that people say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Like for myself, my own personal strength is like details. I really like specifying shit, like whether it is food or whether it's like architecture or whether it's like emotions. It's all really, really, really good to think. It's really fun for me to specify, and from my own, to acknowledge my bias, from my perspective, like it's really good. But wherein I suffer, or like wherein I kind of need to improve as a writer, basically one of my weaknesses is consistency. Like I'm not always writing, every single day, or I'm not always like, I'm not always like double checking. I'm always just kind of going at it at a pace that like works for me in the moment, but I haven't established some kind of consistency to my writing, and that kind of leads the way to, like plot holes, not like no proper development, stuff like that. Like you kind of miss all of that when you're not consistent. Right?
Yeah, your style can change a lot if you take a large break between writing the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
I know one of my big strengths is I'm very like I find grammar very intuitive. So often at times when I write, I find that when I go back to edit, there are very few grammatical mistakes, just because I just don't tend to make them. I do struggle with like tenses and stuff sometimes, but mostly I think one of my biggest weaknesses is like knowing how to like express like a character arc and like having like a consistent story for like a character to learn something.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I also don't write consistently, but like, does anyone?
Mm-hmm.
That's a really hard thing to do.
It is. It's so much fucking harder than thing. I seriously applaud the people who are like, yeah, I write every single day at this hour with this cup of tea. I'm like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
How do you do that? Tell us your secrets.
Like, there's more consistency in me getting struck by lightning than having a proper writing routine. I don't understand.
Yeah. Know your strengths and your weaknesses. It's
Mhm.
important.
Yeah.
Oh, I have another one.
Go for it.
This one was something that like dearly helped me out, and it's not necessarily advice, but it is a recommendation. Specifically, the Emotion Thesaurus, which
God, yes. Okay, emotions are so hard to write.
yeah, the Emotion Thesaurus. So I have my copy here that none of you can't really see. A Writer's Guide to Create a Character Expression by Angela Ackerman and Becca Puglisi.
I literally have a copy of it sitting beside me as well.
Yeah, it is fantastic. It's super straightforward. There's like plenty to go from, or like there's plenty to look up, because not only does it specify like similar, like when you think Emotion Thesaurus you would think like similar words, but no, it opens up like a whole category of like physical signals, like internal sensations, mental responses, like, and I'm basically just reading like verbatim, like acute or long-term responses for this emotion, signs that this emotion is being suppressed. Like, that's so detailed and that's so helpful, because you don't ever really think about it. Like, some people kind of rely on their own kind of experiences. Like, if a character has like, let's say a character has anxiety, like, you may model it based off of what like Google says, or based off of your own personal experiences. You may ask a friend, and while those are helpful, it can also be kind of like, I don't want to say time consuming, but it can also be like, depending on your access to resources, it may not always be helpful because those are very general descriptions. With like if I say, like, I'm just gonna go to anxiety in this, like in this book, anguish, annoyance, yeah, anxieties. So like there's like physical signals like rolling one's shoulders, rocking in place, twisting one's neck. Like you don't think about it. You don't ever really think about that could be a response, but you don't need to, because this could be your characters, right? Like, or this could be like your protagonist. It could be your side characters. It could be your love interest that like reacts like this. And it's so specific, but also still very, very helpful because you can incorporate it in any way that you want into the story, and it would just help it come more alive, right? Like you can have like a very general description of like, yeah, my character was anxious, but like this specifically, very helpful.
Yeah, and I want to jump in here and say, because it has to come up at some point, this is the kind of thing that's really helpful if you're struggling with the whole idea of show don't tell. Instead of saying she looked anxious, you can find like, you know, a description of how certain people react when they're anxious, and use that instead as a way to show your audience that your character is anxious instead of just telling them.
Which, since we're on show and don't tell, I'm gonna come back to this too when we get to bad writing advice. But yeah, for me, showing and not telling is both good and bad. Since we're still
one of those ones, yeah.
Yeah. Like, since we're still focusing on the good, like, if your strength lies in showing, like, if you've developed and you can show, then please do. Like, it helps scenes come more alive. Like, it specifies, like, character relationships in a way that, like, feels very real. Like, showing is, like, serious talent, I think, that can be developed. And when we kind of get back, or, you know, when we flip the topic and go to bad writing advice, I will expand more on this. But just, like, showing, I think, like, when you're able to show your story, it really defines you as a writer. Like, it really kind of, like, sets the standard for how, like, people, like, take in your writing, and also how, like, original, you know, for lack of a better words, you are. Because, like, the way that you show as a writer is definitely not going to be the same as how people, like, how other writers show, right? And that helps you set you apart, but also unlocks, like, a whole new story for people, which is fantastic.
Yeah. It's also just really nice to, like, for people who are, like, very visual, it's very nice to be able to, like, actually see how a character expresses something. Like, it very much adds to, like, the mental picture in my experience. Like seeing, like, someone, like, move their arm a certain way, or, like, the way they, like, you know, hunch their shoulders or whatever. Just, like, little tiny things really says a lot about a character and can give them, like, a lot more depth than just having them talk.
Yeah, like, I guess this in itself isn't really kind of its own point, but it just like goes into showing and not telling, and that's, you know, the 5 senses.
Yes.
Yeah, like, that's kind of been hammered into us, like, during our creative writing classes, basically. But when you're engaging your senses as a writer, like, that is a lot, like, how am I trying to say this? Like, that's awesome, basically. Like, you bring a scene alive more so than just kind of describing how everything is. Like, you can say that this character and this character talked about something, but showing the scene and, like, explaining how, like, how real the scene is by, like, colors, by, like, scents, by, like, sounds, it makes it more real than it makes it, like, frighteningly realistic. Like, yeah, like, going back to the one example, like, you can have two characters talking to each other, but if you just like if there are two characters in a coffee shop with two cups in their hand and like the sound of, like generic radio music and like the scent of fresh coffee beans coming into their nose, like that's amazing. And it's something that can be developed too. Like the writing advice I feel that we've spoken about isn't exclusive to like, naturally talented writers. Like it's something that you develop, and it's something that you
Absolutely.
yeah, it's something that you just work on, right? Like no one ever starts off as a perfect writer. Like I certainly didn't.
Yeah, I actually want to jump in and say this here as well. Like writing is a skill. It's not just something you can just do. It is something that you learn, and it's something that you can develop. So if you feel like your writing is not at a level that you're happy with, keep learning, keep developing. And kind of like, this is kind of relevant to like what we were just talking about, and also this topic. Like, observation is a great way of learning. And I mean that in a couple of different ways. One, I find that like for me, a big part of the reason why I find like grammar so natural is because I read so much as a kid, and I just like absorbed it from the books that I read. So like there's like little things that I never had to be taught because I picked up on it naturally from reading. Not everyone can do that. But like if you're uncertain about something, go pick up a book off the shelf, look through it, look at the way like things are formatted, look at like the sentence variety, look at like all that kind of stuff. You can learn so much just by looking at like other people's works. And then on the other hand, and this kind of comes more back into like the description stuff, like again, if you're having like a scene set in a coffee shop and you're not really sure how to describe it, go to a coffee shop, sit down, like, write down everything that you notice. What does it smell like? What does it look like? What does it sound like? What does the coffee taste like? All that kind of stuff. As a writer trying to like express real world stuff, the best way to be able to do that is to actually go out and experience those things. And if you can't do that, do research. Research is good. Research is your best friend as a writer. Look up everything.
And to go off of that, don't be afraid to ask questions, because questions start you off at an interesting point, but then eventually lead you to finding out something that you never normally did before, like you never normally thought of before. And that seems so simple, but it's surprising to me how many times like you don't ask questions when you're like, especially like I mean when you're writing, when you're receiving comments and when you're receiving feedback, but even when you're writing, like if you don't know, to go off of Alex's example, if you don't know what something is, like if you've never tasted the kind of coffee that you were describing, then there's nothing wrong with asking, okay, what's a similar taste or what's a similar thing to this, right? Because oftentimes you either find something that links you to it, or you just kind of come up with your own original thing.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And like asking questions is so important, because it really just opens up it really just opens yourself up to like new ideas, which is one of the best things about being a writer. It's learning about things that it's not just your perspective.
Yeah. It's important this is just like general life advice. You don't know everything. No one knows everything. No one expects anyone else to know everything. If you don't know something, ask a damn question.
That being said, also write with confidence. If you don't want to have an entirely historical accurate story, like if you're writing a historical fiction, stick to it. Like there's that one movie, Hansel and Gretel Witch Hunters, where Hansel has diabetes because of all of the sugar the witches made him eat, and he has like what is interpreted to be like insulin. He gives himself insulin doses. That that didn't happen in the time frame that the movie was placed. Like, yeah, you got witches and trolls and stuff, but you also didn't have but it works with the story, and the story is good. So just write with confidence and stick to your guns. Does that make sense?
Oh
Yes.
yeah. Like, if you're gonna, especially I think if we're talking about adaptations really quick, if you're going to adapt something for, like for the sake of telling it in a new way, commit to it. Don't try to back out. Like, if the idea didn't end up working, then it didn't end up working. But like, at least you would have stuck to your guns and saw it through, because then, you would then find out like, okay, this worked, this didn't work, stuff like that.
Yeah. Write the story you want to write, not the story that like is 100% accurate.
Like I said, write for yourself.
Going back to that.
Don't
Everything
write,
goes back to that.
yeah, write for yourself. Don't write for the CinemaSins critics. Write for yourself.
Oh my god! Don't write for CinemaSins.
Don't write for CinemaSins. I mean it.
Just don't,
'Cause
CinemaSins. Don't.
I've had this struggle, and I know other people have too. You're like, well, does this make sense? Is this something that people are going to see and be like, that doesn't make sense? Me. Don't worry about those people, okay? They're just looking for something to criticize. They will find something to criticize no matter how flawless your story is.
Yeah. Like, I think when it comes to, and maybe it's just case specific, but when you're consuming fiction of any kind, the suspension of disbelief is really important to have. Like, it's really important to be able to suspend your disbelief. And this is maybe just taking, like, that applies obviously when you're consuming media, but even when you're writing it, or when you're drawing it, or basically when you're just creating something, like, don't be afraid if it doesn't make sense. Like, I've seen some, like, that's what surrealism is basically, but just like some gorgeous pieces that I've seen of like elves hopping between like floating islands has been some of the most gorgeous shit I have ever seen. And like, if you want to have like, like fire yellow, like aurora lights, or if you want to have like, if you want to have like just a long street corner with like lanterns hanging on it, like hanging on the side, that's a gorgeous visual, and you shouldn't question how much sense that makes, because ultimately, like, you can think like the suspension of disbelief, especially for like a fiction, like for all fiction, really just helps you enjoy it more. And I know this is kind of an obscure example, but it kind of ties into what I'm talking about. I'm gonna so have you guys seen Mission Impossible Fallout?
No.
Okay, so are you familiar though with the scene of Henry Cavill cocking his, like, throwing up his fist like he's cocking a gun, so he's like cocking his fists like a, I'm explaining this really badly.
No, I'm not.
Okay, let me so basically just that, let me see if I can find it. I'm going to derail for just a second. I completely forgot how to spell Henry Cavill. Henry Cavill. Yeah, this. This is stupid. It makes no sense. No one needs to do this, and yet it's so fun to watch because you're thinking, hell yeah, that's fun. And like, ultimately, that's what it should be. Like, you shouldn't take things so seriously. Like, no. Yes, it may be a high stakes situation, but you can still have fun with it.
You really did describe that really badly. What do you mean, gun?
Like, he's cocking his fists. He's about to fight a bit.
Putting his fists up, like you do when you fight someone. There's nothing about this that says he looks like he's holding a gun.
No, I
mean,
don't like
your fists like that.
No, yeah, he's throwing his like thing. He's throwing his fist down like he's loading a weapon. He's like, I am explaining this really badly.
He's just getting ready to fight.
Yeah, I don't know. Just I can't explain it, but yeah, just it. Basically, my whole point. Like, who does? Like, you don't really ever need to do that, but it's stupid. It's silly. It's fun. It's enjoyable to watch. Case closed.
Okay.
But yeah, just don't don't always listen to criticism.
Yeah. Another thing that got me thinking of is like, I know you guys talked about Stranger Things the other day, and like I left because of technical difficulties, but I haven't seen the most recent season, but I've seen posts about it on TikTok and such, and people are getting very nitpicky about little details in it, like what edition of Dungeons and Dragons the kids are playing, because it doesn't fit with the year that they're set in, and
Who
also
cares?
the song that Eddie plays in Upside Down, Master of what was it? Master of Puppets by Metallica.
Mm-hmm.
It came out earlier in the year that this is set in, so like theoretically Eddie would have had to like listen to that song on repeat on a cassette, because like you couldn't like look up the guitar line, how to play the song. You can't learn how to play that song on the internet when there isn't the internet. So he had to like listen to that song on repeat on a cassette to learn it by ear and then play it in Stranger Things. So he's like a music god. Like people are like very nitpicky about everything, but they still love it.
Yeah, like, isn't that just cooler that he learned that entire song by ear? How is that not cooler?
Mm-hmm. And like it came out the same year that the show takes place in, so he didn't have a long time to learn it.
Yeah, like that's amazing. Like, and I absolutely agree, don't nitpick, and we can kind of expand on that later, but just specifically in that instant, like, if you suspend your disbelief at like, oh, how he learned it, like the fact that he did it anyway is awesome. Like that shouldn't ruin the scene for you, but for some people I would imagine it does.
There are also
it's just people calling him a god.
Mm-hmm.
There's also way better things to like complain about in this season.
Mm-hmm.
Like Elle's mysteriously developed resurrection powers that make literally no sense and there's no precedent for.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, sorry, this isn't the Stranger Things episode. I'm just really annoyed about that.
Yeah, we should talk about like nitpicks actually, because going back to, and I hate to do this, but going back to CinemaSins is where that kind of culture or like that kind of bullshit really like, I don't want to say blow up. People have been nitpicking all the time forever, but just when it became quote unquote funny to do that, then everyone started doing it, and it just like it took me a while to kind of like stop nitpicking, but really just when you take everything in as is and you kind of determine it for yourself, or you can determine for yourself if it was all worth it or not, like that should be thing. That's been my experience, at least. When I try then to find nitpicks about like, oh, this one thing was off, or like this thing was like kind of like stupid, like it just kind of ruins your enjoyment of it. And that's not to say that nitpicks aren't valid points of criticism, but there's a difference between like pointing out there's a difference between pointing out like the thing. There's a difference between pointing out like modern century like grocery items in Game of Thrones versus like how a character dresses, or like how a character learns a song.
Yeah.
There are some things that are like, I don't, it's like is it relevant to the story that it doesn't make sense? It's like yeah, I think that
the story. No, it doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like how Eddie learned that song doesn't matter. He knows the song, he played it. Good for him. Who cares? Move on.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. That's basically just the thing with nitpicks, yeah. Oh my god, I have another thing to kind of talk about later, but like the thing with nitpicks is just when you're focusing too much on this one small thing, when you're like not focusing on basically like the bigger picture of everything, then that just it just makes you feel as if like there's just never going to be anything perfect, when that's basically the point, right?
Yeah, like I said, listen, those people literally are just looking for something to complain about, and they will find it.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter how small or like irrelevant something is.
Mm-hmm.
They will find something to nitpick. Ignore those people. They don't matter. And if you are those people, get a life.
to kind of expand on that, then another group that you shouldn't always listen to are fan theorists, because fan theories have been a blessing initially, but have just completely, like, I don't want to say destroyed, but it is sullied a lot of fun that comes with watching stuff. And the best case point for this is maybe the MCU, because it's so big, and like because it's inspired by like so many different stories, people are always fan theorizing like, oh, this could be fucking Mephisto or something, or this could or like, you know, like this character from this franchise is going to appear in this movie, or like it goes to the point then where people are like literally harassing actors to be like, hey, are you going to play this character in this movie? Or like, you know, this character, or like this character is for sure going to be in this, but like, what does it matter?
Yep.
Like, you can't just wait. You can't just wait and be surprised until like, and again, case in point in Marvel, like you can't just wait until the actual movie comes out itself before you judge it. Like you can't exactly just like, you know, tune your social media off for just a couple minutes and then just go into it with completely fresh eyes. Because yes, it's fun to think about like what could happen, but the main criticism when it comes to fan theories is that if it's not absolutely perfect, it ruins a movie for some people. And that's bullshit, because yes, maybe the story wasn't like as good as it should be, but that in itself is its own thing. If you yourself as a customer go into a story expecting something out of it, then that's kind of stupid.
I would also like to jump in on this topic coming from the other direction for a second. Which is, as a writer, I think it's really important to respect your audience.
Oh yeah.
Because this is another thing that's been a really big issue in writing recently, is like writers don't respect their audiences, and so they will like dumb things down for their audiences, and you know, which makes your audience feel stupid, which is never pleasant when you're in the audience. The other thing is, you know, expect your fans to figure things out, especially if you have like foreshadowing. People figuring things out is what they're supposed to do. That is the point of the story. You are creating a cohesive narrative, or hopefully that's what you're trying to do, depending on your genre, I guess. But that's what most stories do anyway. And if people figure out what's happening, like, let them. It's more important to deliver a satisfying story than to be shocking for no reason.
There's I'm gonna bring in an interesting example after this, but just, there's absolutely nothing wrong with knowing where a story is going, because even if you know right from the immediate offset like where a story will lead and like what these characters will learn, then like you shouldn't be like, oh, I wish that they had like, you know, pulled a rug out from under. Like, no.
Literally, some of my all-time favorite stories, I knew exactly how they were going to end, because it's not about the end, it's about the journey.
Exactly.
So make the journey enjoyable.
Yeah, and to bring in like to bring in an example where I think this really works, My Little Pony, every single episode that I felt like something was going to happen happened, and I have enjoyed every single one. Like, if I knew it was a Pinkie Pie episode, it was hilarious. If I knew it was a thing, if it was if it was a Twilight episode with everyone else, I was going to enjoy it. If it was specifically I think back to this episode all the way back, I think in season 1, where Rainbow Dash is like, oh, I don't want to read this book, and then she reads the book and loves the book. I'm like, okay, awesome. I kind of knew that from the beginning, but seeing her get there was hella fun.
Yeah. And again, one of my favorite books of all time, which is The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller, which I've talked about on here before. If you know anything about Greek mythology, you know exactly how that book is going to end. It's still enjoyable to read. It's a beautifully written book. You're like, yeah, I know how this ends. Like, it's very hard to go into that book and not know how it ends. It's still an absolutely beautiful book. So it's, yeah, people focus too much on the ending
Yep.
of stories, I think. That's what this is coming down to. So respect your audience and respect them enough to give them a good story, even if it's predictable.
Because there's nothing wrong with predictability. Like, if you know where a story is going, then get there. Like, if you're going to do a plot twist, if you're going to do a plot twist, then do it correctly, and one that doesn't completely disrespect your entire audience's that doesn't disrespect your entire audience, basically, because if Game of Thrones has taught us anything, is that it will be infamous for pretty much the entirety of its lifetime.
Who was it that said the best plot twist is surprising but inevitable?
Yeah. It's what makes whodunits really fun, right? You can kind of feel what this character, and a serial killer, and basically a mystery whodunit. You have your suspicions, and the best kind of stories are the ones that piece together everything slowly, that you can eventually, even if for certain by the time that you get to the midway point, okay, you already kind of figure who it is. That's still kind of adds to the enjoyment, because it felt like you yourself were participating in the story, right?
It was Aristotle who said that.
Was it really?
According to Google, the best endings are both surprising and inevitable. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, Aristotle.
Thanks, Aristotle. You gave us the best thing. You gave us the best template for a magic system. What other kind of pieces of good writing advice are there? Marie-Soleil, do you have any?
Yes. I've got one and another one. It's more about the technical aspects of writing. Have you ever something I do when I start something is that I write the word elephant at the top of the page, and I copy and I write it spelling it wrong with an F instead of the PH. And I do this, and I copy and paste it everywhere in the writing when I get stuck, and I'm I don't remember this detail, or I don't know exactly how this works, but I don't want to stop writing to look it up. Does that make sense? So later on, when
Yes, I've heard this. Yes.
I have not.
So later on, I can go Control F and find every point where I wrote that and look it up afterwards, and I don't lose my train of thought when I'm writing it in the moment.
That's a good point.
Yeah. Similar vein, another piece of advice I've heard that's kind of vaguely similar to that. If you're stuck, go back 5 sentences, and you'll probably find your problem.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The reason why you spell elephant wrong is because if you actually have an elephant in the story, then that way you don't get confused.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's definitely good. Because when you're writing, it's really important. If you're in a writing mood, it's important to be able to keep going and not to worry about the little details that you can fill out later.
Yep, 6-year flow.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Ooh, that's a good one, actually. When it comes to, and maybe this is just my own kind of way of thinking it, but as my own kind of piece of personal writing advice, take it's good or not. Don't think that your setup contributes to your productivity. And what I mean by that is, I have written in coffee shops in the afternoon. I have written in libraries. I have written at my desk. You do not need a perfect setup to write. You just need to have the consistency and the productivity, because for those people who do have a kind of routine with their writing, that's fine. You can have a cup, this specific cup of tea. You can have your favorite sweater on. You can have your favorite music playing. all of that is well and good, but you should not think that you need these things to write consistently, because it doesn't always happen like that. Writing is very much, I think, getting struck by lightning. Like, a lot of the time it can feel infuriating when it's not happening, but when it does happen, it's something that you will never think. It's such a crazy experience when you just get a whole bunch of words down, and it's wonderful.
Sorry, I hate to derail this for a second, but Dean, what's with you and lightning tonight?
It was thundering earlier today.
It's actually so humid in my room right now. I'm dying a little bit.
Yeah, just it was thing, and that's not kind of relevant. I don't know. I just kind of started my own thing. I just thought of the lightning analogy and like sticking with it for some reason. But yeah, no, just maybe that's just my own thing, because I haven't heard anyone else kind of talk about, like, you know, writing setups and stuff. But you don't need a good setup to write. Like, you're typing. You're typing on a thing, you're typing on a Google Doc or Microsoft thing, you're typing on either a Word doc or a Google Doc. You're not mining Bitcoin.
But also there is like a lot of reason. Like, if you find that you're struggling to write, you know, changing up your location or whatever, or like separating things can be helpful.
Yeah.
Like, if you spend all day like on the couch in the living room, sometimes you start associating that with, like, you know, relaxed time. So if you want to like start writing, you might go try sitting at like the kitchen table or something like that. It's not going to be like a hard and fast rule. This is just like, if you feel stuck, try something new. Maybe it'll work.
Yeah.
Your setup won't look exactly like somebody else's setup. What works for you won't work for everybody else. What works for other people won't always work for you. Find what works for you.
Yeah, like, I guess maybe case in point, like, how do we all write? Like, what is our setup?
Haha, you think I write? That's funny.
How do you create, Alex?
I usually write at my desk. But I also really like, I found, like, especially when I'm in class, I tend to just like write like small sections of stories in my notebooks and then transfer them onto my computer when I get home. I find that one of the good ways for me to like generate my brain and get going is to actually write stuff by hand.
Yeah.
It's a different way of thinking about stuff. And then, like, you know, that also kind of like when you copy it from your notebook onto your computer or like whatever document you use as your big one, like, that's a good way of like catching like little errors and being able to fix them. And that kind of helps with that, like, I have to edit this right now impulse as well. Where it's like, it's just like editing a few little things as I transfer it from one spot to another, instead of sitting down for an hour and like changing everything because it has to be perfect, you know? So yeah, I don't know. I think if I'm ever stuck, I like writing by hand.
Yes.
And that way it's also harder to like delete stuff. You know, like on your computer you can just hit backspace. When you're writing by hand, especially if you're writing like in pen, you can't just erase that. And if you write in pencil and you erase it, it's going to leave like a big ugly mark on your page and it's going to make things harder to read. So it's just like a hassle.
But find a good pen that doesn't like run through the page or something, because then you won't be able to read it when you go back.
That's also true.
Yeah.
That's happened to me.
Oh no.
Do you also handwrite for your setup, Marie-Soleil, or?
Oh yes, I tend to sit on the floor with a notebook, book, and a pen. I have a dresser in my hobby room that has 6 drawers, and all of them are filled with notebooks.
Notebooks are great. And
They are.
if you, like me, see cute notebooks at the bookstore and go, I need that, well, now you have a reason to use them.
Yep.
Yeah. Oh my god. Speaking of notebooks, I have one like right behind me. I should probably use that. I intended to use it for like important Xeno stuff, but I have not.
I literally have 4 on my desk right now. And like another 3 on the table beside me. Yeah. Notebooks are great. Highly recommend.
Staring at me from across the room. My unused notebooks. You're talking about us, but you never actually use us.
Oh my god. I think for me then, I write from my desk. I think I've talked about how I write before on previous episodes of the podcast, but just I like to listen to music when I write. I'll usually write in I usually just kind of write until whenever I feel like I'm finished. I prefer listening to like orchestral or like, like epic trailer music sometimes. Like those, like you guys know, like those like compilations of YouTube where it's just like whole hours worth of music. I like listening to those. Depending on how I'm feeling, I'll sometimes like go to the library or like go to like a cafe and just sit down and write. And it's kind of been weird doing that nowadays, or even thinking about doing that nowadays because of, everything that happened. But yeah, I got a lot of work done when I was just writing in a cafe, actually. It's very like atmospheric for a writer. And I think maybe that's just like an association that kind of comes with like, oh, if you're, if you're in a coffee shop writing, then you're a writer. Then like, I don't know, it worked out for me. So
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
One other piece of advice, actually, while we're on the like topic of like writing setup that I've heard is really good is when you're like finished writing for the day, don't stop at like a stopping point. Like don't stop at like the end of a paragraph or the end of a sentence. Like write the like beginning of the next sentence and just leave it there. And then when you go back, it's supposed to like help you like get right back into, well, I need to finish this sentence,
Mm-hmm. It gives you a starting point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything else we want to touch on in good writing advice?
Not really for me, actually.
I'm good. Are we ready to start into the bad?
Oh yes.
Let's do it.
Yes. This actually was like a much like longer conversation than I expected.
I'm surprised.
Yeah, we talked about a lot. We did get through a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, let's tear some things apart.
Okay.
Should we? Where should we start? I was gonna say.
I mean, I could start with my big one, and then we can work our way through the rest. Like.
Yeah, go ahead.
I have something to say about your big one too. I think maybe.
Okay.
Yeah.
I hate it when I see people say like, if you're stuck, just kill off a character.
Oh.
Ugh.
Because death is supposed to be permanent. And when you're just killing off characters willy-nilly because you get stuck in your writing, one, you run out of characters. B, you end up just making characters that have no point in the story except to be killed off.
Yeah.
And then you have to end up finding some way to bring back a character when you realize actually this character was important to the story and I killed them off, so now I need to find some magical way or mystical way to bring them back.
Yeah. God.
Mm-hmm.
And then it just becomes a crutch for so many people that you're just killing off all of these background characters and making more background characters that people aren't emotionally attached to.
Yeah.
Because like, oh, these people are just going to die.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah.
This is a good one to start off with.
This is gonna come back in like a couple more episodes this season.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Including one of the ones that I'm hosting.
Plugs. Everyone stay tuned.
Coming back in another one that I'm hosting as well.
Yeah. No. The next one we record, this will come up.
Mm-hmm.
Trust me. Yeah. No, yeah, I agree. It's death is one of those things that's like difficult to talk about in stories. But I agree that like killing characters off willy-nilly just because you don't know what to do next, like what's the point? What's the point? What are you achieving? Nothing.
Yeah. If you kill a character off because you're stuck, you're a bad writer. I don't care. You don't know what you're doing. Like, just I get that, like, you know, like, obviously in a story specifically, death is supposed to mean something. So when it doesn't, it's like, okay,
Just annoying.
yeah, because you wasted all of that time, both yours and the audience's, building someone up just to tear them away. You awful person. Like,
I feel like this happens a lot with like where authors will like want the shock value, so they'll take like a character, and oftentimes they'll do it with like children or like teenagers and kill them off just because they're like, shock, haha, gotcha, aren't you sad now? And it's just, yeah, like I said, this will come up next week, but like yeah. It's annoying. It's very annoying.
yeah. Do you know what else is annoying and what I've oh, I can't wait to revisit this level of this thing. I can't wait to revisit this. Sex scenes in writing. Don't include them.
If it's not necessary for the plot, don't put it in the book.
Exactly, yeah. And I think as I kind of giggle basically at that, there's one writer that I'm specifically thinking of that's like, stop.
I do feel like authors do this too, like same with like the death, where they're like, oh, I don't know what's gonna happen next. Sex scene.
Yes.
I don't know if this is what they actually do. I've never seen anyone like give advice like that. But that's how it feels a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And or I need to show that these characters have an emotional attachment. Let them fuck.
And specifically to go off that, let them fuck specifically for multiple pages at a time. Completely unwanted, completely, like, not to the enjoyment of most people.
6 hours on a beach.
Under a boat. With everyone on that boat.
If the only way you can make people know that your characters are in love with each other is by having them have sex, then you are a bad writer.
Yeah, yes. Please, here's some writing advice. Show that your characters like each other. Don't tell us by forcing us to watch them have sex.
Or read about them having sex.
Yeah.
Same thing. Anyway, I feel like we're getting very derailed.
Oh, yeah. I thought we were about to go on a very infamous side tangent. Like, all over again.
Also, if you do need a sex scene in your books, take an anatomy class or a biology class and learn how sex actually fucking works.
Don't trust porn.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna say it. Don't. That shit not realistic. Just gonna say it.
Also, don't be afraid to just say penis. If I see one more instance of like manhood or like steel, I'm gonna cry. I've had enough. Like, don't be afraid to say that. We all know what it is. You don't have to like fantasize it.
I mean, I feel like if it's genre appropriate. But I do want to jump off of this actually and kind of move away from this discussion. In that I think some, like, I guess good advice, but I've seen, like, this is one of those ones that, like, sorry. I was going to use this to transition and then I messed it up. Basically, the point is, concrete descriptions, simple descriptions often work better than, like, very abstract and weird ones.
Yes.
Like, I feel like a lot of people feel like this one's one of those ones that's really tricky because, you know, variety is something that you want in your stories. So if you're saying like the same word over and over and over again, like that's like, it's annoying to write, it's annoying to read. But at the same time, like if you're using like a weird nickname for something instead of just like calling it what it is,
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean? I don't feel like I'm explaining this very well.
No, I know exactly
No,
what you
I
mean.
got it. I got it.
I actually have kind of a story off of that, if it's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my grade 12 English teacher told us the story of somebody who wrote in their diploma. They you could tell they looked up words in the thesaurus just so they were having a variety of words. He wrote that he dropped his calculator and it exploded, so he ejaculated in rage.
No.
Because I guess the definition of ejaculate that he found was like you explode with intense emotion or something like that.
No.
Oh my god.
This is actually a perfect transition into the thing that I wanted to talk about the most. Okay, 4th grade teacher, like early in the school year, put up a poster on one of the like cork boards in our classroom. It was like a gravestone with like RIP written across the top. And she told us, this gravestone is for all of the words that you're not allowed to use in your writing this year. Across the whole year, only 2 words were added to the tombstone. One of them was awesome, because I think she was just really annoyed at us, at people saying, wow, that's awesome. But the other one, and this is the important one, was the word said. This is such common writing advice, especially among like school teachers, is don't use the word said. Drives me insane. Like the thing is, I understand where it comes from, because again, we talked about like, you want to use variety in your writing, and I think the intention of this is to like get students to think like, is there a better word than said for this particular dialogue? The thing is, sometimes there isn't. Sometimes people are literally just saying things, and you can just say, he said, because that's what they're doing. So, yeah. My grade 6 teacher also drove this in. She's like, you're allowed to use the word said twice in any of your stories, no more than that. Or like, I will dock you marks. Literally, like, sometimes people are just speaking. You're allowed to use the word said. You shouldn't only use the word said, but you are allowed to use the word said in your stories. Please use the word said. Please.
Yeah.
I'm begging.
I got 2 things from that. One, absolutely. Like, if it fits the situation, then yes, use another word other than said. But basically, yeah, just if there's no kind of like big important thing, like if your 2 characters are just speaking to each other, and if it's supposed to be like fun and everything, like you can just say said. You can describe everything else around them, but like in terms of just the word that describes how they're talking, that's it. And secondly, I just want to have a whole series now where we just talk about our high schools and like our junior high and high schools, because every single time I hear a story from your school, Alex, I just become more like, dude, what the fuck have you been through?
We weren't allowed to use the word said or awesome in our stories in grade 4. I don't know what to tell you.
Oh my god.
Yeah, that's my big one. That's the one that I see that like drives me crazy, because like, yeah.
Since we're talking about big ones, then my biggest one is the use of adverbs, which I critiqued as a pet peeve early on when we first did the podcast, but basically I've just kind of not thought about it as CinemaSins-esque as I used to think, because so I can't explain the origin of it. I've only just been told, like, don't use ly, like ly words in your, or like words ending in ly in your writing all the time. Like, certainly you can use it, but if you can describe your scene a bit better, then obviously do that. But as I've kind of like learned from my own writing that sometimes you just can't have a word, or like you can't describe a scenario or like a scene so vividly yet. There's nothing wrong with placing an ly word in there, because eventually you can either A, change it, or B, leave it as is. Because, or like thing, it's not either just A or B. Like you can either like A, change it, B, like describe it, or C, take it out. Because really, like, ly word, like, you know, adverbs are basically just meant to help describe things. Some writers are ultimately stronger when it comes to descriptions, but that doesn't mean that you always have to describe things. Sometimes you can just keep it very simple and very, like, you know, concrete, right? And let your audience kind of imagine something for themselves. Ultimately, they may still get the same picture, but really, like, when it comes to the use of ly words, it's something that helps. It's not something that should ever be, like, you know, like warned against, because ultimately, like, you have to start somewhere, right? And if you were to phase out adverbs, or, you know, words ending in ly completely, then, like, how else are you able to think? Like, that's a pretty nice, like, starting point for a lot of writers. I certainly started with a lot of that in my early writing, and look at where I am now, right? Like, that's a pretty important stepping stone, I think. So, yes, adverbs. Let's discuss.
I would actually like to jump off of this, because I've actually heard really good advice about how to, like, deal with adverbs. Which, okay, I took, like, this writing course once when I was, like, in high school, and one of the advice that, like, the person who was leading it gave us is what she liked to call "kill your fluffy kittens," which is to say, you know, when you think of a kitten, you're going to automatically think of it as fluffy. You know, kittens are fluffy. Is this always true? No, of course not. But generally speaking, when you think of a kitten, people are going to picture a kitten that is fluffy. And so therefore, you don't need to say that the kitten is fluffy.
Mm-hmm.
You can just say it's a kitten. And then if it's not a fluffy kitten, then you can specify that. And that's when you specify that. And the same thing applies to, like, adverbs. I think I saw, like, a really good post talking about this a while ago. I tried to find it, but I couldn't. But one of the things it talked about is, like, for example, the song title "Killing Me Softly" is a good example of where it's really good to use adverbs, because it, like, puts a new, like, texture on it. You know, like, if someone said, "Oh, he killed me violently," you're just kind of like, yeah, that's how killing is. Killing is violent, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But if he kills you softly, it kind of, like, makes you think about it differently.
Yeah.
So adverbs are good to, like, you know, change the way, like, undermine someone's assumptions about something, I guess, is a good way to put it.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, challenge your, like, preconceived ideas, or even play with your preconceived ideas about something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And as a thing, like, as a descriptor too, it's like adverbs can be used like to start you off somewhere.
Yeah.
Like if you're saying, and this is me just kind of, like, you know, talking about what I already mentioned, but just like if you say, like, if character A is saying something harshly, then, like, if they're trying to say it, like, if they're trying to, like, boast about it, or they're, like, snarling about it, like, maybe the word just doesn't come to you immediately, so you just put harshly there to start you off, right? And then you fill the details in after you edit, or, you know, someone points it out, like, oh, why don't you try this? Like, as a description thing, like, as a descriptor, adverbs work. Like, you shouldn't ever be discredited for, you know, using adverbs when you can just expand on the scene. Like, sometimes you just don't have it in you yet to describe it fully.
Yeah, this is where I'd recommend something like a reverse dictionary, where you, like, look up a word based on, like, its definition and then find the word for it. Because sometimes there's so many words in the English language, you can't be expected to know or remember all of them all the time. So yeah, definitely, again, this is where we come back to first draft. It's a first draft. You're going to edit it. So I would definitely agree that, like, if it's a temporary thing, it's great. Just, like, put it down, go reverse dictionary it later when you're like not, in the swing of things, and you can change it. And sometimes the adverb doesn't need to go. Sometimes it's fine.
Yeah. So it was Stephen King that said don't use ly words. Stephen King used a bunch of adverbs in his books, and then he wrote a book about writing advice and said don't use them, and he stopped using them. And you can look at that as like him growing in his own writing and everything, but like there's nothing wrong with using adverbs.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with it. It's also part of like the show don't tell, because adverbs are like telling her she ran quickly down the hall instead of describing like how her feet pounded the hallway or whatever as she ran.
Well, I think it also comes down to like the idea of like simplicity. Like instead of she ran quickly, you could say she sprinted. Like English is a great language because we have a lot of words that mean almost the same thing, but not exactly the same thing. It's a gift. We should use it. Not all languages have that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think for like, if we're okay to move on to another one, there's one that like I can bring up.
Yeah, I'm good. Alex, you good?
Yeah.
Yeah. So in terms of bad writing advice, I don't know how much sense this will make, but your favorite authors should not be your writing style. So basically don't write like your favorite authors. I think that's maybe good writing advice that qualifies, but just if you take writing advice from your favorite authors, or if you copy your favorite author's writing style, don't do that.
It's good for practice.
It's good for practice. I was gonna say, like, if you want to like work on like developing your style, a really good way to do that is to figure out like what other people's styles are, and it's really good like practice to like mimic writing styles. But after that, you have to develop your own. You have your own voice. Don't try to be anyone else.
Yeah. Don't copy others. Don't copy others' styles, because just the whole point of what makes writing special and what makes a lot of your favorite authors special in the first place is their style. Like, yes, it might take a bit of time to develop it, but ultimately you should be encouraged to do so. Like, if this author is setting the standard for like this genre of books, you can start off writing like them, but to stick with that style for all of your career just makes it obvious that this is someone else's success and it's not entitling of your own, if that makes any sense. I don't know how much sense that makes, but basically just like when you as a writer want to stand out, it is through your own writing that helps you, right? It's not through any associations with like this style or this style. It's how you do it that makes you stand out. And whether that, like, you shouldn't even consider like financial status at that point, because that's not the point of writing, right?
See, I have a book called Steal Like an Artist. It's kind of about copying other people's styles and stuff and such, but making it your own. So you don't copy just from one person. You don't idolize just, I want to be the next like Rick Riordan. You find a bunch of different artists or authors that you enjoy their works, and you find parts of them that resonate with you, and you make it your own.
Yeah, if you like something, I think it's really good exercise to think about why, like what it is about it that makes you enjoy it, and how you can like incorporate that into your own writing.
Yeah. And if nothing else, like, of course, like analyzing someone's styles kind of points you in a good direction, because if you like how this author describes things, then you can kind of start off with that. Or if you like how this author characterizes, or if you like how this author paces the plot, like, it starts you off somewhere.
Yeah.
You just shouldn't plagiarize it, basically, because there's like, if their style is so like synonymous with who they are, then everyone will know that you are just copying them. Which is not only unfair to the writer, but it's also unfair to you as a writer, because, like, if you're trying to make it, and if you're trying to like really succeed as a successful writer, you shouldn't be like succeeding in someone else's shadow. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, actually, like, kind of jumping off of this, something that I've seen a lot of recently, is like people like describe their stories by being like, it's a mix of this story that you already know and this story that you already know.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like this idea that like I think it's part of the like corporatization or like commercialization of art. But it's like it's kind of this idea that like your ideas don't have their own merit and you think people will only like them because it's like something else that they enjoyed.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's important to let your work stand on its own.
Yeah. And you shouldn't even be focusing on like how successful that first thing, like you shouldn't be focused on like how well it does financially, because then you'd be avoiding like, okay, like yes, people are buying this book by the dozen, but like there's still so many plot holes and like so many grammatical errors that you didn't see because you were thinking like, oh, this is making me so much money.
Yeah. You start writing for the money instead of writing for yourself.
Yeah, which becomes
Read is the death of art.
Yeah. Which
like, sorry, I made myself angry.
Like it just becomes obvious at that point that like as talented and as renowned as a writer as you may be, when your audience starts like looking past the curtain, basically, there's no going back. Like you can tell that either like, you know, you as a writer is like you or the writer yourself, or like, you know, your team of editors behind it. It's like it's supposed to be a pretty polished copy, but you know, what else then do you have to? I don't know. I've kind of just lost track. Never mind.
Oops.
What else in terms of bad writing advice is there? I think
I've got one that we kind of touched on it in the good writing advice, kind of the adverse of this piece of advice, if this makes sense.
Yeah, hit us with it.
Only write what you know. I feel like that is very bad advice because that pigeonholes you into writing what you know. And it's like, but I want to write about vampires. I don't know what it's like to be a vampire. I'm not a vampire. I want to write about the life of a 16th century peasant. I'm never going to live in the 16th century. Like, I'm never going to know what it's like to cast magical spells or make potions and whatnot in the way that they do it in books. I'm never going to know what it's like to be at the Fae court, the Summer Queen's court, or whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
I can still write about it.
Yeah, I think this advice is like one of those ones that you can't take too literally.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of those ones like, you know, write what you know, as in, and if you don't know what it is, if you don't know something, do research.
Yeah.
Yay.
Yeah.
And your books are going to be very monotonous if you only write what you know, because you won't have any variety in characters. If all of your characters follow the same pattern of this is the person that I know how to write, so this is the only person I'm going to write.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like
there are some authors that definitely do that.
Yeah.
Not saying names, but if you know, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like you don't always need to step into the other person's perspective to write a story well. Like, of course, it means a lot when it is written authentically, but I think that only really kind of comes with some caveats. Like if it's like a historical piece, then obviously like a lot of research is recommended. But when it comes to fantasy, you're the one who's you're the one who's deciding everything. Like you don't have to be like you especially don't even have to look back at like previous references, right? Like I know that the kind of standard when it comes to writing elves is Tolkien, but if you want to write elves differently, totally. Like, absolutely do that. You don't have to base it off of some previous thing for it to be special. Like, it's what you do with a template that makes it your own, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially I think in fantasy too, where a lot of stories, and maybe I'm just looking at like young adult fantasy, but young adult fantasy really, to a point, blends together a lot of the time. Not always, but just when it comes to, when we did the young adults, or the Hunger Games era episode, a lot of, like, Hunger Games, Maze Runner, Divergent, they all had very similar tropes, a very similar structure, and how everything was just kind of approached. And yes, they may have had like their own separate plot lines, but a lot of it still felt very similar, and that kind of, again, just made it feel very it made one each not super special. I don't know if that makes any sense, but just like,
Yeah.
you shouldn't be copying someone else's success, right?
Yeah. You also mentioned something very briefly that I want to go into a little bit more. And this is kind of the concept of like own voices stories, and kind of the idea that they're the only ones that like are worth anything. I think this is more like a more popular idea like a few years ago, where it's like the idea that straight authors shouldn't write queer characters because they don't have that experience.
Yeah.
Or like, white authors shouldn't write characters of color because they don't have that experience, or like abled writers shouldn't write disabled characters because they don't have that lived experience, etc., etc. And it's like, it's one of those things where I get where it's coming from, and what you mentioned, Dean, is like that kind of stuff is really valuable. Like when you have own voices stories, like that stuff is very valuable, and it's definitely stuff that needs to be like upheld and uplifted. But especially when we're dealing with like social issue kind of things, like you could even bring this to like, should men write women as characters? Because we all know that goes really badly sometimes.
Yeah.
But at the same time, when you're dealing with like, queer characters or characters of color, and like this whole cultural phenomenon where people will see, one black character in a series and go, you're just pandering to the people of color. They don't say it like that, but you know what I mean.
They do, though.
They do say it like that.
They do.
Sometimes
like that.
I was saying they probably don't say people of color. They probably say something a little worse.
Oh yeah.
But
yeah.
I'll give you that.
But like, you know what I mean? Like people will say stuff like that, and it's like, if those stories only come from people of color, they're never going to be accepted. So yes, we need to like uplift own voices stories, but we also need stories from people that aren't part of those groups that incorporate them, because that like normalizes them. Sorry, I'm just going off on like a social justice rant again. But
no, you have a point. Like, there's like, if you want, like, with the valid criticism of men writing women, like, men can write women. There's just a clear thing. There's just a clear way to do it. There's just a clear list of like do's and don'ts to write women, and especially like if you're a white author trying to write like people of color, there are clear do's and don'ts of doing that.
Yeah,
right?
and the thing is, if you want to do that, do it. Just do it respectfully and do your fucking research. Don't just make assumptions.
Oh yeah, especially like
you have biases. You might not know about them, but they are there. So do your research and find out what you shouldn't do. Basically.
Yeah, and you can still have a lot of like the fun that you get when you're introducing these characters. It's just that when it's a character that is not of your gender, or that is not of your skin color, it's not of your thing, it's not of your familiarity, there is absolutely nothing wrong, and it is actually strongly encouraged to just ask someone who knows about this. Like, if you are a man who wants to write...
They're okay with it. Don't just go up to like a random black person on the street and be like, so what's it like to be black, you know?
Well, yeah, of course.
There's a lot of people that have talked about it online. So look it up online. Find people who are willing to talk about.
Yeah, like, there's nothing wrong with, like, listening in and, like, consuming, like, you know, there's nothing wrong with taking in shared experiences, right? Mm-hmm. Obviously, each individual experience is different, but you can kind of take what is there and learn what is respectful, and then just translate that into your characters. Like, of course, it doesn't have to suit everyone. Like, you're still going to have a lot of divisiveness when it comes to your characters, but, like, in that way, that should be the kind of thing. That should be the kind of discourse you were going for. It shouldn't obviously be clear that, like, oh yeah, this character was written offensively. Let's all validly point this out, right? Like, you should have debates of, like, oh, this character has, like, great motivations, but, like, they're but they have, like, awful execution. It shouldn't be, holy shit, this character was written by a racist or something. I don't know what I just went there.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean, though, yeah. Again, I think this just ties back to do your research.
Mm-hmm.
Write what you know, and if you don't know it, learn it.
Yeah. If you want to write about it, you can write about it, but you got to do the research.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and, like, it shouldn't be discouraged from doing so either. Like, if you, like, for me, as a man who is, like, whose stories, or whose main novel right now has a large cast of, like, women in it, there's just clear do's and don'ts that I'm following to, like, not have these characters be, like, offensive. And it doesn't take any work at all to do that. You're just thinking, okay, they're a person. Great. But also, the experiences that these characters have is something that I don't have. I don't know how to experience these things, so I'd have to look it up myself and ask, like, the women that I know in my life to confirm this and to, like, verify this, if this is, like, wildly offensive or not. Like, it's not that hard.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I've got I think I was the last person who brought up a piece of bad writing advice, or was it got us onto this tangent?
It was someone.
Who knows? I don't know. We're here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do either of you have another piece of bad writing advice you'd like to talk about?
I'd like to start that, like, I am starting off this knowing nothing of what I'm about to talk about, but just, like, we all know the old adage of, like, don't judge a book by its cover.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
I'm not about to suddenly say, yes, absolutely judge a book. Like, what I'm trying to say is, as a piece of bad writing advice, like, don't think that just because a book is not to this person's liking, like, if your favorite influencer is saying that this book is bad, don't immediately assume that it is completely awful, because maybe it's a good book. Maybe you really do enjoy it, and you should not be discouraged by anyone to kind of, like, define it for you. Does that make any sense? Am I kind of, like...
Yeah, it's like, form your own opinion on it. Don't just take out somebody else's word for law.
Yeah, basically, yeah. Just form your own opinion. I can't believe it takes me a while to, like, get to these basic points, but anyway, just...
I'd say also... Sorry, continue.
Well, I'm just, like, just to quickly say it, like, you as a writer, or you as, like, a consumer of media, like, especially when it comes to stories are very, very personal sometimes. It can reach a lot of audiences, but we each kind of respond to characters, to, like, emotions, to, like, difficulties, to tension differently. It's always going to be felt differently. And that's the fun of like talking about these things, because you realize either, you know, you never really kind of like it's the fun of like fan engagement. Like you can share with people that are similar in these, you know, that you share common interests with, like, oh, what did you think about this? What did you think about this? Like, it's fun. And when you have someone ultimately telling you like, oh, this piece of media is bad, or like this writer's books are not good, like find out for yourself. Because maybe in that book cover that this artist is saying like, oh, it's kind of bad, when you actually read the book itself, it might be the most fantastic thing you will ever read. And that's because you went on your own. That's because you trusted your own gut with that.
Yeah. And if you don't want to spend money on the book, that's what libraries are for. Go to the library, borrow the book. You don't even need to finish reading it. Just return it to the library.
Some part of it, I'm not going to lie to you, some part of me, when you said go to a library, I was like, oh, are you going to steal the book?
No, don't steal books from libraries.
Yes, commit.
But no, it's good, because then if you like the book and you want to support the author, you can go out and buy it.
Yeah, like if you like, there's samples online too nowadays of, especially of like, well, like especially like, you know, with big name authors like Leigh Bardugo, there's always samples of her books online. There's always people reviewing her books everywhere. But even on a podcast like ours, where we have like a very small audience, like we share samples of our work all the time, and if that interests you, then of course, like, feel free to check it out further. But that being said, like, listening to other people define an opinion for you only really kind of is fair when you also share that opinion already. Like, if you think, like, if let's say you think that like Shadow and Bone, for example, since I brought up Leigh Bardugo, is like a really fun series, then if your favorite influencer is saying that, then you can think, okay, like, I have a lot of common opinions about this, and I have a lot of valid criticisms. But if you knew nothing of Shadow and Bone, and your favorite influencer was saying that like this is a fantastic series, like, would you really even be influenced to check it out? Like, do you deserve, like, is it fair for you to do that? Because if you're letting someone else kind of define an opinion for you, like, that kind of really just defeats the purpose of going into a story anyway. Because, like, if you, I don't know where I'm going with this, but just if you read a book and someone's basically like, okay, like, this story is fantastic for this reason, because my favorite influencer told me so, and not because I genuinely thought it was. It's like, well, that's kind of bullshit.
Yeah,
that's not really special anymore.
I don't want to say, I think this goes like the other way too. Like, I know I can be very harsh about some of the books that I dislike, but I actually don't think you can really judge someone for enjoying something just because you don't. Like, you know, I've been very like harsh towards like Sarah J. Maas and like a lot of her books. And I'm personally not a fan of them, which you might have picked up if you've watched any of our episodes.
Literally any of them.
That being said, I still think people are allowed to enjoy them. Like, yeah, I think they have a lot of problems, but some people are like able to see past those or see things that they really, really like, where I see things I dislike. That's valid. You're allowed to like those books. And just because someone you trust has like a different opinion on something than you, or someone you look up to has like a different opinion to something to you, doesn't mean like you should like necessarily judge them for that. I mean, like, this is one of those things where I'm going to be like, use your discretion, because, you know, there's some things where you really don't want to support something because it's bad, and sometimes you have to trust other sources for that. Or like that kind of thing. But it's still one of those things where like use your discretion, but don't trust one single person on everything, and also like don't judge people just because they like things that you don't.
Yeah.
For the record, this does not apply to Harry Potter. If you still read Harry Potter, I'm judging you.
Mm-hmm.
Just wanted to throw that out there.
It depends on why the media is bad too. Like,
Yeah.
Like Sarah J. Maas, I think, in my opinion, is just kind of trashy and gross a lot of the time. But sometimes it's fun to watch trashy or read trashy, gross things.
Yeah.
Some people really get enjoyment out of that. That's fine. If you're reading something that's like actively harmful, that's where it's a little tricky.
Yeah. Like if it's
yeah,
like if it's, again, it kind of just also plays back into the suspension of disbelief thing. Like if you're able to suspend your disbelief with a certain story for like enough to enjoy it, then yeah, that's fine. But that doesn't mean you should overlook like some of the things behind the story, right? Like,
yeah,
it's like
I also
fine.
want to say, yeah. Sorry, I'm just trying to like be really careful with how I say this. The reason that I don't think people should support Harry Potter is because J.K. Rowling is a terrible person and she profits off anyone's support of her.
Yeah.
If we were to like die tomorrow and no longer benefit from that, then whatever. But the truth is that like people who vocally support her or her work, she takes as like support of her extremely harmful views.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I don't think books should ever be banned. A lot of people will try to be like, oh, this book is bad, so people shouldn't read it because if you read this book, you're like a serial killer sympathizer or whatever. That's all bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
Just for the record. So it's one of those things where it's really tricky. Get critical thinking skills, form your own opinions. Don't support shitty people.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I have to say on that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Just like know what you're reading, basically, and know who it is you're reading. Oh my god, I can't speak. Just know what you're reading, because like you can enjoy two things at like you can be aware of two things at once. You can know two truths. Like you can enjoy this fourth season of Stranger Things, but you can also still be uncomfortable with the whole Nazi prison thing. Like you can those are two truths. Totally fine. Well, one of them obviously is not totally fine, but just it comes with just being like thing. It just, like Alex said, like be aware of your own like critical thinking. Like you can enjoy media, you're allowed to. You just also need to be aware of like who is profiting from that, and
also what kind of message is in the thing that you're reading.
Yeah, exactly.
Like that new Top Gun movie came out recently.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Blatant American military propaganda. Still a fun movie from what I've heard. I'm not going to watch it, but it's like one of those things where like you can be aware of like if you're aware of like the kind of message that it is trying to spread.
Mm-hmm.
If you can see past that and enjoy it, but like still be aware of that, that's fine,
Yeah. And speaking of movies, like it just takes like obviously you shouldn't be nitpicking all the time, as we were talking about earlier, but it still means that you should just be aware of like what it is that you're watching, right? Like if you're going to be watching like a 2.5-hour movie on like one given topic, then just be aware of like who's producing it, like who's like what does it represent, is everyone like what are the undertones behind it, because the thing is with media, like while you are allowed to enjoy it, it is how you respond to it that defines like that impact, if that makes any sense. Like it's clear that like some movies were made just to be entertaining and like be kind of stupid and like fun, like kaiju movies, for example. Big monsters, very fun, you don't ever have to think anything more about it. But like historical pieces, or like pieces like movies tackling on race experiences, it's much trickier then, because you really have to like you really have to think about then, like, how is it that I will respond to this movie, and how is it that I will respond to the things that were presented in this piece of media in general, right? Because that defines just how
I do what I do in the future.
Yeah, exactly. Because like you may not realize it at the time, but and I'm not saying that like, I'm not saying that like every single movie will start planting seeds in everyone, but it's if you don't think about it enough, then you may be playing into like harmful rhetoric, right? Like if you do enjoy Harry Potter, like it's hard to do that knowing better.
As an adult, I won't blame like a 10-year-old who says that they like Harry Potter. It's not them. It's as an adult.
Yeah, and context is also really important too, because in this specific instance, like you shouldn't obviously like ruin everything for a child. Right, like you should allow them to have that kind of sense of wonder and enjoyment that we originally had.
Yeah, I mean there might be some negative feelings towards the adults that are in their life that are giving them these books.
Yeah,
like I also think, it's sorry, continue.
But I'm not like I work in childcare, right? And I've got kids that come in and they mention Harry Potter, they mention this and that, and I'm never gonna like sit down and talk to these kids that aren't my kids about the creator of this works and how harmful she is and everything. That's not my place, and that's not something for me to talk to these kids about. I will kind of judge their parents silently about it.
Yeah, you're just like, was there not another option?
With Percy Jackson instead, or this or that?
Yeah, like,
yeah, it's. I was gonna say something and I forgot what it was.
I think just, well, like for me at least, to kind of like expand on this a little bit more. Yeah, just context is important. Like you shouldn't obviously. You shouldn't go ruining things for people, but if the person who is profiting off of their enjoyment is just a terrible person, then it would just spare them. Like it would be it would be a benefit if you just just told them the truth, because don't support awful people.
Yeah.
It's one, I think, okay, this is what I was gonna say. In terms of kids, I mean, yeah, if you're not in like a position to do this, then don't. And I'm not gonna say like sit down and be like J.K. Rowling's a terrible person and you should feel bad for liking Harry Potter. Like, don't do that. That's just mean, especially if it's to like a kid. But I will say that, like, I think getting kids to like look at certain things, like they're never too young to start developing critical thinking skills.
Oh yeah,
which is something that I think our society is sorely lacking at the moment.
There's a lot of things, but yeah.
Yeah, but that is one of them, and I think that, yeah, it's like it's one of those things where I reread the first Harry Potter book recently for one of my classes, and like from a perspective of like an adult reading these books and having the critical thinking skills that I've developed over like my years at university and stuff, being able to like look at those books like more critically, it's very fascinating to read it. And I don't think I read a story a while ago about a high school student who was allowed to choose any book she wanted to read for like an English assignment, like a book study. This is from the perspective of like the friend of the teacher of this student. And this is a student who didn't like to read a lot, but she went to her teacher and she's like, okay, I want to read Twilight. And the teacher wasn't really sure if she should let her student like read this book. Is it like appropriate? But also if she doesn't let her read it, is she going to read anything at all? And then the friend who was telling this story gave her the advice of like, let her read it, but tell her to look for like the things that she likes about the book, the things that she doesn't like, and that sort of thing. I think like this is good skills for kids to develop, is to like look, what do you enjoy about this book? are there things in this book that make you uncomfortable? Why? And like that kind of thing. Because sometimes it's better to let people come to their own conclusions about something than it is to just like straight up tell them.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Because sometimes when you tell people things, like they're just gonna like close their ears and be like, blah blah, no, I don't hear you. But if you're like, okay, but what do you like about these books? What do you not like about these books? Why do you like those things? Why do you not like those things? And it can help people come to their own conclusions.
Yeah, and it will ultimately define their own enjoyment too, right? Sorry to cut you off, Alex, but yeah, I just wanted to say that because
And I think this is something that I find really interesting when I'm watching like reviews of like books and movies and stuff, is people will point out little things and be like, well, this is something that I didn't like, this is why. And like, you know, hearing people like elaborate on those kinds of things, I think it's really good for making you think about those things yourself.
Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I don't feel like we're even talking about writing advice at this point anymore.
No.
We're just kind of rambling.
We got a little off topic.
Yeah. I mean, like,
I just wanted to say all that.
Yeah. I mean, it does still kind of tie into, like, bad writing advice, at least. Like, it's, you know, like...
Basically, the point of this whole segment was critical thinking. Get some.
Mm-hmm. Context. Consider that. Yeah, and, like, not to kind of drag it out a little bit more, but yeah, just context is very important. Like, again, you can acknowledge that two things are true. You can enjoy some things about it. You can also not enjoy some things about, you know, your writing, about your media, but just it helps to just kind of think about it from your own perspective and not be kind of like, you know, swayed by anyone to kind of make that decision for you. Because like if you're like, and you know, based on context too, like if you are a kid who is just coming across Harry Potter for the first time, like that's fine. You're allowed to, like, that kid is allowed to like have that sense of wonder that, again, you know, we originally had when we experienced these stories. But just because like that franchise has been like, you know, sullied, or like you don't support the author anymore, doesn't mean that, you know, it doesn't mean that you should let everyone, or it doesn't mean you should kind of force that upon everyone. Like, it may feel like you are like doing them a favor, you may feel like you are just keeping them away from a terrible person, but like you shouldn't be the one to kind of do that for them.
Yeah.
Like, it would suck for them to kind of like have that told, but it also feels a lot worse when you kind of like, you know, steal or like deprive someone from something that they really enjoy. Right? Because that's just not fair. Right?
Yeah, I generally say, like, if you know something shitty about something and someone you know is currently consuming that media, don't bring it up unless it like comes up naturally.
Yeah. Oh,
I feel like
absolutely.
I feel like this happened with like Attack on Titan in this group chat, where like someone was like, "Oh, why don't you like it?" And I'm just like, "Well, did you know, actually?" And then, you know, like it's still not like a fun experience, but I still think it's like important to share that information if you have it in the right circumstance.
Yeah, like you shouldn't just be like, you know, if you know something shitty about, like, Attack on Titan is like the perfect example of this, because naturally if someone is really enjoying a piece of media, or if someone's really enjoying like the writing, for example, then like coming to their own conclusions about it is a key step in like how they further like develop and consume this product, because it's either the turning point for them to either show you that, yeah, okay, this kind of sucks, or holy shit, they're kind of an awful person. Because, and I say that because like if they just blatantly are like, oh, it's fine, it's whatever, you know, it's like you're missing the point. There's a lot of deeper themes here that are not okay. But again, like that's just also like you as a thing, like you individually as like a consumer or a writer of, you know, stories, should consider the fact that it is not only your opinion, right? Like you can share similar opinions with people, but the things, the beliefs and the fun that you have with the story may not always be the same with someone else.
I think this comes back to the idea of like like not necessarily just trusting your audience, but trusting people in general.
Mm-hmm.
Don't always assume the worst about people,
Yeah.
I guess. Look, this is more just general life advice.
Yeah,
But still important.
it is.
Yeah, you like not everyone is going to react the same way. Like not everyone may feel like your like the ending to your story is going to feel satisfactory, or not everyone is going to like how like the missions in your video game is structured. Not everyone is going to enjoy the media that you put out, but but you should trust the audience that does enjoy it. Right? Like
And
you should
trust that there will be an audience that does enjoy it.
Yeah, because inevitably like passion drives people in, and it allures people so much that no matter what you do, no matter how you put it out, people are going to be paying attention. Like, you know, within our group ourselves, like we all have something to offer in terms of, you know, being creative writers. So we're all like constantly like checking in with ourselves and being and asking questions about our stories, about our world, and that's the entire point of this podcast, right? And it's because of that trust that you and your audience have that like should be the driving force behind you succeeding as a writer, you succeeding as a creative person. Like it should be trusting not just your own craft, but also trusting in the people that believe in you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Can we get back to bad writing advice?
Let's get back on topic, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I've got like one more piece of bad writing advice. What do you guys got?
Well, I was gonna say, Dean, you mentioned critiques and stuff from like our creative writing classes.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have any like other like full ones down, but I wanted to share one of the funniest ones I ever received. Which was
Before you do that, just to answer Marie-Soleil's question, I have one more piece of bad writing advice.
Well, the fact that Alex brought that up, they reminded me. Now I have two pieces of bad writing advice. But like, Alex, were you gonna say something?
Yeah, I was just gonna share what the funniest one I ever got was.
Okay.
Which was I wrote this story one time. It was just like a short story, which I don't do very often. But it was called, I believe it was called, I Watched a Shadow Steal My Shoes. One of the comments I got back on this story was, your title is too long.
Okay. That's right. And that's it.
That's all it said. There was like no elaboration on it. It was just I don't like your title, it's too long. Like, okay. Good for you.
Yeah.
So I guess my advice from this would be you don't have to take every critique seriously. Know what works for your story. Sometimes you're gonna get silly things like that. You can just ignore it and move on with your life.
Oh yeah. Marie-Soleil, do you want to share yours then before I share mine? Because I feel like I don't mean to gloat, but I feel like mine is definitely like one that applies to all of us. And you know, not just us three speaking right now, but like, you know,
yeah,
everyone.
No, yeah. So there's the one that Alex reminded me of, the one that they made me think of kind of actually goes along with what they said. I wrote this short story and I went to this little writing workshop, not an actual class, and their response to it was, this sounds like fan fiction, because it was this little self-indulgent short story that I wrote that was like in second person point of view from someone's dream. And it's like, so what does this sound like fan fiction? That doesn't tell me anything about what I wrote.
Also, I hate this. It sounds like fan fiction. Have you ever read fan fiction? The amount of like diversity in like fan fiction is astonishing. I've read fan fiction that is absolutely horrendously written, but is still like enjoyable because it's fun. And I've read fan fiction that is better written than some published novels I've read.
Mm-hmm.
Like this idea that fanfiction has like a specific, like I know that like it, again, fanfiction does tend to be very self-indulgent, which there's nothing wrong with.
Absolutely
but like this idea that like fanfiction has one specific like way of existing is kind of ludicrous to me.
So yeah. So as Alex said, don't take all criticism to heart. Because some people don't know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
I've got one more point. But so Dean, did you want to go last with your point?
I'd say so because I have a lot to say on it.
Okay. People say like there's the idea that you can't call yourself a writer until you finish writing something. And that's bullshit. If you write, you're a writer. It doesn't matter if you've never actually finished, if you've never shown anybody you're writing, if like you just keep it hidden in a journal. If you write, you can call yourself a writer. Don't feel like you have to have sent out 10 manuscripts and gotten back 19 rejections or whatnot before you can call yourself a writer.
Fair enough, yeah.
That's my last point.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So then
you're a writer because you write.
Yeah. So then my last point, which is very specific to us because we have all been a creative writing class, a few comments does not make you a good writer. Or like a few good comments does not define your worth. It doesn't define your status. It doesn't define like your abilities yet. It doesn't define you. And the reason why I say this is due in part to like, and I'm not trying to throw shade at anyone here, but just due in part to the atmosphere that like a competitive art like creative writing is. Everyone, like, you have so many people that you know, whether it's within our own group personally or whether it's in like smaller other writing groups or like, you know, other creative writing friends that are wanting to be creative writers. And so there is a lot of judgment, there is a lot of like cynicism, there is a lot of there's a lot of like pity, I think. I don't know if pity is the right word for it, but just like looking down at your own writing because it's not someone else's. And that is completely unfair because your own writing style is unique to you. You shouldn't be writing based off of you shouldn't be writing based off of like your friend's writing style. You shouldn't be like considering your friends, like all of your friends' comments just because they have a book published. Or you shouldn't be like you shouldn't be letting your own ego get to your head when your entire class or when your entire friend group or when everyone that you know loves your writing, because that basically just means that you are not open to criticism. Like, yes, you may be a fantastic visual writer, but like, does that really justify anything? Like, is that helping you grow? Is that helping you learn? If you're only receiving praise, are you really learning from being a writer? Does that make any sense?
I mean, like I said earlier, know your strengths and know your weaknesses as a writer. And yeah, I think if you're only receiving praise for your work, that's when you start focusing on your weaknesses. You go, okay, I like that you enjoy this thing that I'm good at, that I know I'm good at, but did you notice any of this thing that I struggled with, or like that kind of thing? And that's when you start going, like you have to start asking questions. But also, and this is more just general life advice, stop comparing yourself to other people. You're your own person. Be your own person.
Yeah, and to speak on that, again, more as general life advice than anything, just comparing yourself is very much not as beneficial as you think it is, because you see someone that is doing better than you, or you see someone that is like reaching the standard that you want, and you're thinking, man, like I wish I had that. Like, that doesn't do anything for you. Like, it really doesn't, because at that point you are not only neglecting your own like physical abilities, or your own like physical like capability, like your own capabilities basically, but you're not allowing yourself to learn what those are. And as a creative writer, if you are constantly looking up to like some other writer, or like some other group, or like some other publisher, or some other, like, if you are constantly comparing yourself, you are not really realizing what you yourself are capable of. And that is thing, and that is like it, you know, in relation to bad writing advice. Like, my bad writing advice is to like looking at others for comparison. There's an extent to do that. Like, you can start off by like either mimicking or copying someone's writing style, but eventually you have to come into your own. However long that takes, as long as you get there. Like, you can have your friends and you can have your family vet your work, but you should not let that thing, you shouldn't let just the praise get to you. You should be asking questions like, you know, is this specific thing good? Is this specific thing good? Like, what else do I have to improve on? Like, do I need to do this now? Like, be open to asking about, or be open to asking valid questions to help you improve, because creative writing is an art form, art is never complacent. It always evolves and it always grows, because that's just how society is. Like, that's just always how we've been as people. And you know, not to be all philosophical about it, but just like, creativity is not and should never be one single thing. So it's important to never look at one single thing and think that that is the standard that you must meet, and instead focus on defining your own.
Yeah, I do also want to say, not to like, I'm not like completely disagreeing with you on this, but also I do think it is important. I think this is something that a lot of people, especially a lot of like creative people, really struggle with, is accepting praise and compliments. So I do think that like, you shouldn't let it get to your head, obviously. But if someone says you're good at something, believe them. You know, and this comes back to me for like, acknowledge your strengths, like know your strengths and weaknesses. Know your strengths. Take pride in them. Maybe let it go to your head just a little bit. Not like a lot, but just a little bit.
Yeah.
You could use it, honest. A lot of people could use that, honestly. Like, you know, be confident in your ability.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, there's nothing wrong with like, feel like, you know, like, if people want to appreciate your work, absolutely let them. Like, there's a lot of good work that you've put into it as a writer, and the thing is then to just know if it, like, know when it is getting to your head or not, because a compliment is a compliment, but like, if it's starting to feed your ego a little bit too much, and you're not really checking yourself anymore, and you're not letting other people check yourself, then like, you've stifled, I think, how I've kind of saw it. Like, you've set your own standard, you're not really trying to improve anymore. Like, that's kind of boring at that point, among many things. But, you know, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think he's, what did you say? Like, art isn't stagnant?
Art
like,
is evolving. Let's just say art is always evolving.
Yeah, you like, I mean, if you're happy with your work, you're lying to yourself, but but like, you should always be striving to be better. But it's also important to like, acknowledge your strengths and like, look back at where you've come from and be like, yeah, I've grown at this, I've gotten better at this. You know, it's one of those things that's a balance. I think more people are going to struggle with taking a compliment than they're going to let something get to their head. Like, listen, our society's definition of pride is being slightly confident in yourself. So like, be confident in yourself, have pride in your work. Like, be open-minded and, like, listen for things, but, like, it's definitely important to acknowledge that you're good at stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to, like, really emphasize that, because I do think that's something that a lot of writers struggle with. Be proud of your work. You've come very far.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
You have.
Yeah.
Look back at those notebooks of the writing you did like 10 years ago and you'll realize how far you've come.
Look back on those previous like character sketches and think, man, my art style's improved.
Oh, fucking hell. Yeah. I love finding notebooks and like sketchbooks from like elementary school and just being like, what was I thinking?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like look back at thing, and to kind of go off of that, like look back at your old, like look back at some of your, at previous drafts and realizing just how different the style has been from then and now, and look back especially at any comments that have been made your way, and just realize how important that is. That like your story is so engaging and so like compelling in and of itself that like people, no matter what, if they're giving criticism or if they're praising it, find something special in it. Like they find something special and realize the potential that you as a writer have. So the fact that they are willing to give you comments really pushes engagement. It really just makes your story a lot more special, because when suddenly you want to engage with it, then that's a really good sign that people care.
Yeah. And likewise, if you have friends that are writers, engage with their works too. Ask them questions about it. Like if it feels good when someone does it for you, do it for other people too.
Mm-hmm. Also, if you have friends who are also creative writers, start a podcast. It's fun. you learn so much both on podcast and off podcast. It's fantastic.
At least start a group chat with all of them and see the chaos that explodes.
Yeah.
Yeah, send each other your works. Send each other joke works. Draw fan art of each other's characters. Do it.
Which we've done all of that, by the way. Oh my god, we should start posting some of that onto Patreon. Yeah, no, like when and maybe this is like thing to kind of like not necessarily transition away from bad writing advice, because maybe there's someone thing. Like, are we okay if we just kind of go off to like maybe what? Can I go back to like good advice for a second? If it's okay?
Yep. I think so.
Yeah. Find a support network for your writing that knows what they do, like that knows how you think, that knows what it is to be a creative writer. And by that I mean like whether you're joining a writing organization or whether you are like, whether you're just talking with other creative writers or whether you're joining like Discord servers or whether you're like, whether you kind of follow in our footsteps and just make a group chat, like, or whether you just make a group chat with your friends, like it really, really helps you to like to an unexplainable degree just how much you learn from other creative writers within your field, or from other creative writers. Basically, like you learn so much about world building, about characters, about designs, about like weapons, about like dialogue from other writers that are doing the same thing that you are, but in their own way, and it is amazing.
Yeah, genuinely, if you are a creative person, like not just a writer, but just like a creative person in general, having a community of like-minded people is so helpful. It's so motivating. You learn so much, and you make like some really good connections.
Mm-hmm.
Highly recommended.
Yeah, like I kind of like, like you can, if you want to follow in the footsteps of the InkGuild and just, make your own writing group, which yes, absolutely do that. But you can do thing like doing fan art of each other's characters. That has been so fun. Like that's been so fun to do, like as a creative person. And even if you don't know how to draw, like you can always figure out something. Like there's Hero Forge, there's there's Pie Crews, you can figure it out. Engaging with like other like with other creatives, basically, like Alex was saying, like it doesn't have to just be creative writers, but like if you're an artist, if you're a musician, if you're a writer like us, like, and sometimes if you're all of those, the best thing to do for like your career basically, and maybe just for your creativity in general, is to just engage with other people, right? Because not only do you learn more about the craft that you and this other person really enjoy, but you learn how to do it better, right? Like, you learn from each other in ways that you didn't ever normally think about.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry I kind of like went on a spiel there for a bit, but yeah, just community. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Communities
are good.
Yeah, that was all my writing advice that I wanted to talk about. How about you guys?
Same with me.
I think I'm good. So I guess that brings this episode to a close.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So, well then. I guess I'm going to do the outro now then. Well then, with all that being said, we're going to close for tonight. Thank you all for listening in. We are at the InkGuild on TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, and Tumblr. Our main home is on YouTube and Spotify. Homes are on, I guess. But you can also connect with all of us individually through our social media, or at least most of us, I believe. If you're interested in what we do, then consider subscribing to our Patreon for as low as $3 for the exclusive content, but ultimately keep an eye out for more podcasts and other creative projects. Thanks again for listening, and everyone have a good night.
Good night.
Night, everybody. Bye.
Sweet dreams.